Recently, I've been feeling a little weird. In a single week, I had three amazing dreams about Tyrion Lannister, each progressively hotter than the last. I'm usually more attracted to men closer to 6 or 7 feet, broad shoulders, cute glasses. A dream like this was really out of the ordinary, and I kept having new dreams about Peter Dinklage, not Tyrion. I had to start digging into why I was attracted to someone who was a whopping 4'5" because I couldn't understand it. And neither does Peter Dinklage. In an interview with Playboy magazine, Peter says he takes his new sex symbol status with a grain of salt. He's sure that the hype around him is temporary. I think I'm going to have to disagree, and God, I wish he would send that smoldering look my way. So, let's look over how Game of Thrones created a sex symbol from an atypical subject, Peter Dinklage, using film theory and technique, and how this could possibly expand the spectrum of what is allowed to be attractive. A film theorist named Steve Neal wrote in his paper Masculinity as a Spectacle that identification involves both recognition of the self in the image on the screen, a narcissistic identification, and the identification of self with the various positions that are involved in the fictional narrative. Riddle me this. Who is the main character in Game of Thrones? If you had to pick, you may say Jon Snow or Daenerys Targaryen. Neither of these characters have nearly as much screen time as Tyrion. In 67 episodes, he's in 54, outweighing any other character. By traditional means, Tyrion is the main character because we get to see his perspective the most. Tyrion, with his shortcomings, could have easily been written as the lovable underdog who we would cheer for out of pity because we all know what it's like to be put at a disadvantage for something we've no control over. Instead, we're shocked with his wit, confidence, sarcastic attitude, and his resolve to accept himself and not let others keep him from rising. In a scene between Tyrion and Jon Snow, Tyrion says,
Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you.
it's the first episode, and we're already feeling his words to the bone. Who the hell doesn't remember that quote? Not only have we already begun to identify with his struggle to prove himself, we're struck by the sudden intelligence in this lusty and drunk dwarf. It's the beginning of wanting to be like Tyrion, and it only grows as the series continues. We see Tyrion escape one trial after another with his quick wit, watch him rally troops who thought little of him only moments before, and admire his kindness, integrity, and love. He's not going out and fighting with a sword in his hand, as most main characters would, though not for lack of trying. It's what Tyrion says that shows just how impressive he is.
So mainly you talk and drink.
And we want to be that. We see pieces of him that we see in ourselves, and we grow to believe more and more that we can be like him. We want so much to be like him, especially when he slaps Joffrey. This explains his fan base, but what about the horde of women saying DLITF? Google it. Here we look to science and film theorists Laura Mulvey, Stuart Hall, and Lawrence Grossberg. According to the original books, Tyrion was physically repulsive. He was supposed to be ugly and deformed beyond just dwarfism. I suspect the writers of HBO decided to sexualize the character, and they had several means of slipping in codes to help the audience view Tyrion as a hot commodity. Codes? What codes? Well, these are signals that you may be consciously or unconsciously recognizing and may change meaning given new context. For instance, depending on where you see a picture of a cow in a store, it could be a milk or beef product. If seen elsewhere, it could mean something else entirely. Stuart Hall suggests that the codes have been profoundly naturalized. The operation of naturalized codes reveals not the transparency and naturalness of language, but the depth, the habituation, and the near universality of the codes in use. They produce apparently natural recognitions. This has the ideological effect of concealing the practices of coding which are present. These codes are part of our existence in society, and they can be used in subtle or obvious ways to convey meaning, including who we should find attractive. A study published in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology found that a certain level of beardedness was found more sexually appealing to women, so long as it's kept clean and tidy. Psychology Today summarizes a study from the University University of Mexico that has determined that women are more attracted to men with a sense of humor who can make them laugh because it is a sign of intelligence. These are likely consequences of how we evolve, but there are other means of making characters appear more desirable. A collaborative study between several universities in China determined that facial attractiveness ratings are increased when associated with positive characteristics, like respectful, brave, gentle, generous, or loyal. The color red is considered very sexy, and as we can see, Tyrion wears a lot of red, it being the color of House Lannister. This in particular has more to do with ideology. For every study that says red is sexy by nature, there's another that finds the evidence inconclusive. Those negative Nancy studies don't get nearly as much attention. Ideologies define what is taken to be common sense. The truth of ideological statements appears obvious and even natural, but people are often unaware of many of these ideological codes because the codes are unconscious and often unchallengeable. We see all of these articles in media telling us red is sexy, so it's become ingrained into our culture to see it so. My final example comes from a well-known film theorist, Laura Mulvey. In her paper from 1973, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, she points out that women in film could be completely taken out without affecting the narrative. The women are there to be looked at, sexualized, and objectified by the male gaze. I'm going to take this one step further, if Laura hasn't already, and say that many women in Game of Thrones are there to be sexualized and make a certain dwarf look all the more desirable. Universities of St. Andrew, Durham, and Exeter have recently come out with a new study that strongly suggests that men are rated as more attractive when desired by another woman, or multiple women, at the same time. Our culture has come to see people with dwarfism as jokes. They aren't the main characters, they aren't sexy, and they aren't in dramas and action movies unless there are dwarves or elves. But Peter Dinklage has been working on challenging this. He's been in multiple roles that don't cast him as an elf or dwarf, though he has taken those roles too. Media and entertainment turn dwarfism into a joke, and it can reverse that. Almost all media texts, from the news to Everybody Loves Raymond, can be seen as ideological. Although it is true that not all media texts support the status quo or the power structure, what is often presupposed or taken for granted is the set of relationships that usually follows. Ideology is, then, about trying to get people to see the world according to terms or codes that have been set by one or more groups of people. I started crushing on a classmate shortly before I started having those dreams about Peter. My taste in men has definitely grown. It took 7 years of Game of Thrones to do it, but it worked. I hope that media can continue to expand the spectrum of what our society accepts as masculine and attractive, using these often subtle film techniques.